Good afternoon. My name is Chris Konetsky, and I'm the publisher and executive editor of the Business Record. I want to thank you and welcome you to the third event in our Iowa Stops Hunger initiative presented by Hy-Vee. When the pandemic hit, we at BPC realized that various issues would be exacerbated: mental health, equity issues, and of course, hunger. We asked ourselves what we as a media company could do to help shine a light on these issues and hunger in particular. We did a lot of listening and responding, but for an issue as monumental as hunger, the answer was to create a statewide initiative to bring awareness and inspire action around hunger. With Hy-Vee as our presenting sponsor, we developed this initiative in record time. Since launching last July, we've had multiple events, focus groups, produced hundreds of stories, produced a full takeover edition of the Business Record, 6 videos, and DSM published a brand new special magazine to help highlight the issues around hunger. In addition, more than 40 businesses have pledged to help support this initiative and has subsequently promised to take at least one direct action towards ending hunger in Iowa. And we'll be publishing those steps that they took later in June. And so here we are, 1 year after the pandemic began upending the world and shining an even brighter light on the issue of food insecurity. So our goal today is really to pause, reflect on what has changed in the past year, evaluate where we are, and talk about what needs to happen as we keep moving forward. Because of course, the problem of food insecurity will continue into the new year and beyond. Thank you for being here as we continue learning and playing a role in making a difference. We've got a great discussion lined up for you, but before we get going on the panel, we have a few housekeeping things before we get started. First, if for some reason we were to lose our connection or Zoom shuts down, don't worry about it. Use that same link that you used to get here. We'll have things back up and running. In a moment, we're going to turn things over to our moderators today, who are going to introduce our sponsor and our panelists. And we've got a variety of questions that we're going to be using to prompt the conversation, but you've got a role to play as well today too. On the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a couple ways to interact with us: the Q&A feature and the chat option. The Q&A spot's going to be your best place to submit a question that you'd perhaps like panelists to answer. We've got a number of questions pre-prescribed, but those questions can really help shape how we might ask some follow-up questions. It might help guide some of the conversation. In addition, they can potentially be answered by the panelists as well. In addition, you can also chat with the entire audience. I want everybody to take a quick second, find that chat button. Our panelists, they're giving their time and energy for us today. If you could give them a quick thank you, a big shout out into the chat, that'll go a long way for helping warm them up. Normally they get a nice big round of applause. We want to make sure that they see and hear the appreciation for being here today as well. In addition to chatting, we'll be sharing some of our work throughout the event that we've been working on as part of Iowa Stops Hunger. And of course, if there's thoughts, takeaways that you're having from today's event, we'd love for you to share that using the hashtag Iowa Stops Hunger. Next, I'd like to introduce our company president and group publisher, who's going to be leading the conversation today. Suzanne has been an integral part of the launch of Iowa Stops Hunger and was the driving force that helped pull together some of the focus groups in those initial days to help figure out what role we could play in helping amplify this in the community. Susanna, thank you for all you do and welcome. Go ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you, Chris, and welcome everybody. We're delighted that you could join us today for this topic. Hunger and food insecurity is something that we feel very passionately about at Business Publications Corporation. So we feel honored to be able to work with so many people in the community to try to bring some awareness and inspire action around an issue that's really affecting a lot of our neighbors. Before I get to our panel, I want to introduce our sponsors here today: presenting sponsor Hy-Vee and our supporting sponsor Mom's Meals. First, we're going to have a word from presenting sponsor Hy-Vee. As many of you probably know, Hy-Vee is a chain of supermarkets here in the Midwestern United States with more than 245 locations in 8 states. Hy-Vee has long been a leader in the food industry, and since the pandemic has been a leader in fighting hunger and food insecurity, and now they are also a location that is providing vaccines. And before we hear from Hy-Vee, we're going to play a short video. Stacy, you can roll the video.
Give a little bit of your love to me. Give a little bit, I'll give a little bit of my love to you. There's so much that we need to share, So send a smile and show you care.
Thank you again to Hy-Vee. And now we will hear from Hy-Vee's Senior Vice President of Communications, Tina Pottoff. Welcome, Tina.
Thank you so much for having me on the conversation today. We are thrilled to be a part of this and a sponsor of Iowa Stops Hunger. When we first came together to talk about this idea, we knew that hunger and security needed to be addressed in our community. It was simply amplified by COVID-19 and continues to be a problem at this particular moment in time, as it always has been. It's just that COVID-19 has truly shown a light on this even more so than it has in the past. Here at Hy-Vee, there's a lot of things that we've been doing with community partners, and I wanted to take a quick moment to let you know some ways that we've helped out, but also ways that you can implement some things at your local businesses as well, because they're pretty quick and easy hitters, if you will, when it comes to just small events that you can implement within your local community. The first one is just a couple weeks ago, actually during Black History Month, we teamed up with Creative Visions and also Meals from the Heartland to figure out some ways that we could package meals and then also do drive-through contactless giveaways to people that were food insecure. This is actually one ability where we could actually take all of our resources and go directly to those that needed the food and actually deliver the food to families in need. Something else we have coming up is we're actually going to be donating protein. And many times we donate protein throughout our 8-state region. And this is just another time coming up towards Easter. We'll have our annual Hams for the Holidays event, which will take place with Hormel. And you'll be seeing a listing of areas where if you know a family that's food insecure, we encourage you, especially here in the Des Moines area or central Iowa, to encourage people to stop out and get a free ham so that they can celebrate the holiday, Easter holiday, and around the 1st of April and have a nice protein in their household. And in addition to that, there's always the opportunity for you to be able to supply more than produce through giveaway events. And this summer, we were able to hold more than 100 produce giveaway events throughout our 8-state region where people could actually get health and wellness and fruits and vegetables into their households and feeding their kids. And so these are small things that you can do, whether you team up with us or a local food bank, or maybe even a supplier that you know or a nonprofit. We're happy to provide any feedback or any tips that we've learned throughout the process, and we encourage others to do the same. But you have a great panel up ahead, and we're, again, happy to be a sponsor of Iowa Stops Hunger, because together we can combat hunger in our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you to Hy-Vee. We know that in addition to combating food insecurity, Hy-Vee has actually had to readapt almost all of their processes for safety protocols. And so trying to do that and address community needs at the same time, we are very, very appreciative. So thank you. So in addition to Hy-Vee making today's program possible, is our supporting sponsor, Moms Meals. You may not have heard of Moms Meals. They are a leading provider of home delivered meals nationwide, based right here in central Iowa. And before we hear from Moms Meals, we have a short video to play as well.
Yes, I am from Des Moines originally. I was born 77 years ago, and this house really has a history to it because my mom and dad bought it when he came back from World War II, and I came here with them when I was 3 years old, so a lot of history here. And now I have a lot of issues walking and losing my balance and falling, and just there's so many things. But Mom's Meals is one of the wonderful parts of my program because I am not able to do a lot of cooking and things, and if I didn't have this, oh my goodness, I'm so grateful for the way that these are provided. I tell people I have a very young mind, but my body won't cooperate with me. So I'm extremely grateful for Mom's Meals because I'm very arthritic and I can't hold on to things. So I can't chop anymore. And I love fresh everything. Mom's Meals provides me with such a wonderful variety, and I get to choose from a menu. I mean, this is incredible.
Thank you so much to Mom's Meals. I think one of the things we've learned in the past year is just how dramatically the pandemic and food insecurity affects senior populations and those who are in the disability community. So thank you so much to Mom's Meals. I'd like to introduce and welcome Tim Conroy, National Vice President of Government Healthcare and Partnerships with Mom's Meals. We're glad you made it on camera. We were having some video problems, but there you are. Welcome, Tim.
Yes, Susanna, thank you. And thank you to Business Record and Hy-Vee for supporting Iowa Stops Hunger. Mom's Meals is the nation's leading provider of home delivery meal programs for the Medicare and Medicaid population. And I want to encourage everybody on this, everybody joining today, just to think about what we're doing as a society and coming off this pandemic. Food insecurity, as mentioned before, has been exacerbated during the COVID-19 crisis. And the more we see our worlds getting back to what the new normal is, the more heightened visibility around food insecurity that we're starting to see in a lot of our communities. So that video of Miss Lynn was just an example of one of many Iowans that face food insecurity, and organizations like ours and Hy-Vee and all the different panelists, public health department, departments of Medicaid, departments of aging in Iowa, all of these organizations working together. It's going to take all of the above strategy to support food security for Iowans and the rest of the country. So thank you again for your time today. Look forward to the panelist discussion, and we're proud to be a sponsor of Iowa Stops Hunger.
Thank you so much. We thought it might be instructive and fun to show you one of the videos that we've been working on producing with Hy-Vee to set up the topic of Suddenly Hungry, which we'll tell you a little bit more about today. So Stacy, can you play that video?
Any of us could be one paycheck away, could be one flat tire away, could be one medical emergency away from being food insecure.
1 in 10 Iowans are food insecure, and we know that rate is rising because of the pandemic.
I think there are still folks who don't think about the impact of food insecurity. Food insecurity is not an inconvenience. It's about life and quality of life.
It may be hard to believe that in a state that helps feed the world, many of our neighbors right here in Iowa did not know where to turn for their next meal. Even some of the people who help produce food for others.
Food insecurity isn't about an unwillingness to work or be productive. It's a symptom of a greater issue that we need to address as a community.
Since COVID, food insecurity has doubled. It's tripled for households with children.
First couple of weeks of the pandemic, we really exploded with our food pantry, and the amount of food that we gave away and the amount of families we were seeing increased just dramatically.
We don't have this image that we can really produce that shows what hungry looks like, because it impacts so many individuals from every part of our community.
How can we be innovative in delivering different resources to our community members? The WIC program existed, SNAP or the food assistance program existed prior to the pandemic, but people may not have been familiar that that's a resource in the community for them to utilize.
Well, everybody has a story now, because we have a fair amount of Iowans who are now unemployed, have been unemployed due to the pandemic. You had to pay your bills, had to pay your rent, then you had to find out whether or not you had enough money to buy groceries.
But it does not have to be that way. We have food right here in Iowa. We just need to get it to the people who need it. There are many organizations on the front lines of fighting hunger, and they are available to help, but they need your help. You can take action to fight hunger in 3 ways.
Give food.
Give food.
Give food.
Give funds.
Give funds.
Give funds.
Give your time.
Give your time.
Give your time.
Together.
Together,
we can make a difference.
Because no Iowan should go hungry.
Hopefully that video put a bit of a face on this issue, so I'm glad that we could share it in order to frame the discussion. As you saw, we're talking about Suddenly Hungry, about individuals who might be our neighbors, who've never experienced food insecurity before, on top of a population that has experienced food insecurity. What we want to do today is talk about what has happened in the last year, who are those individuals, and how can we help? When you see a video like this and some of the conversation that we'll have about how dire things are, it can be very easy to feel hopeless. But what we want to do today is to also explore some solutions and some thoughts about what you in our audience can do. Some of you are already on the front lines and are doing things, but others are looking for ways that you can contribute. So I'd like to welcome and introduce my co-moderator today. Michael Crum is a senior staff writer from the Business Record. And in addition to his regular focus on economic development, Michael has been leading the charge in covering food insecurity for Business Record, doing a lot of original reporting and then tagging stories that we see in other media to try to keep you, our readers, informed about food insecurity. Welcome, Michael.
Good to see you today. Thanks everyone for joining us.
So Iowa Stops Hunger is a statewide initiative of the Business Publications Corporation. And with us today are an impressive group of leaders from around the entire state. I'll introduce them now in alphabetical order, and I'd like to welcome all of you here. Deann Cook, who is the Executive Director of United Ways of Iowa, representing all of Iowa. Dr. Nalo Johnson, you saw her in the video. She is the Director of Division Health Promotion and Chronic Disease Prevention at the Iowa Department of Public Health, so really covering all Iowa with a very long title, I might say, Dr. Johnson. Next, we have Mike Miller, who is the President and CEO of Riverbend Food Bank. His service area for his organization covers a very wide swatch of eastern Iowa along the Illinois border. We also welcome Clint Twedt-Ball, who is the Executive Director of Matthew 25, a Cedar Rapids nonprofit organization that supports communities, and Rebecca Whitlow, the Director of the Des Moines Area Religious Council, or DMARC, which is primarily in central Iowa. So thank you so much for coming. Normally, if we would be in person at an in-person event, remember those, we would normally get a rousing applause for our panel, but we can't. So we'd love for you to get in the practice of using the chat and give a warm welcome to our panelists, or send a welcome note in the chat. We only have till 1 o'clock, and we're going to barely be able to scratch the surface of an enormous issue. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll ask Michael to kick off the panel with the same question to all of our panelists.
And what we'll do here is I'll ask the question, and then we'll kind of go around the horn and ask each of our panelists to answer that. The first question we're going to ask today is, over the past year, what is the biggest shift made in the fight against food insecurity that you've seen in your organization, or kind of overall? Deann, would you like to take that question and get us started today?
You would think one of the biggest shifts would be learning how to unmute yourself. I would say innovation and adaptation. As we heard in one of the videos, this was a problem before the pandemic, but it has just elevated and exacerbated a problem that already existed. So we had really good systems for getting food to those who needed it, but they had to really scale up. They had to work together. They had to convene. They had to become less fragmented and more collaborative. So we've really seen great things in innovating and adapting to meet the very sudden and rapid challenge.
And Dr. Johnson, what's the biggest shift that you've seen in the past year, you think?
Sure. So within the division that I oversee, we administer the state's WIC program, which provides the nutritional benefits and education to low-income women, infants, and children. So similarly to Deann's comments, one of the most significant shifts has been how we are able to administer that program. So we needed to apply for and receive federal waivers in order to deliver the program virtually and ensure that we did not have a break in benefits distribution for clients, and so that clients could continue to access the program in safe ways. We also increased our social media and marketing because we also recognized that there were many individuals who were newly eligible and may have not needed the WIC program previously. So wanted to make sure that they knew it existed as a resource for them at this time.
And Mike, with the Riverbend Food Bank, and you're a part of the state, what has the biggest shift been for your organization as you've tried to get more food in the hands of people who need it most?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I mean, there are kind of the obvious disruptions right off the bat, the significant increase in need, serious interruptions to the supply chain, and then substantially inhibited operational methods. But I think the biggest shift is that people are more aware of the issue of hunger than ever before. I think pre-pandemic, hunger was almost an invisible problem. People almost really couldn't believe that, oh, come on, there's really not hungry people in America, right? In my opinion, it's because the problem has shifted from a lower class to a middle class. Almost everyone knows someone now. And so I think there's more awareness of, wait, there are hungry people. And that presents an opportunity, not just to get past the pandemic, but for our ongoing work to put an end to hunger in the state.
I appreciate that. And Clint, I'd like to kind of pose the same question to you for your organization there in Cedar Rapids. What is the biggest adaptation that you've seen or have had to undertake over the past 12 months?
Yeah, for us, if you remember back, when the pandemic started, all the bus and transportation systems shut down. And so instead of having people come to us, we delivered food to people. So we set up a system of volunteers that would actually take things to people's doors and drop it at the door so that they could pick it up. That was our biggest shift.
And Rebecca, in your position, you oversee the food pantry network for DMARC. That's one of the levels that's really on the front line in this effort that we've seen over the past year. What changes and what shifts have you seen that you've had to make over the past 12 months to meet this need?
Well, the initial shift that our 14 pantries had to move away from choice, where people came in and chose their own food and for safety purposes and social distancing, and they lost a lot of volunteers. So they had to find another way to distribute the food to people safely. We expanded our mobile pantries, which we have 2 of them, to more sites because we realized we needed to take food to people where they needed it. And we created a delivery program, kind of like Clint, so that we could actually address the issue of people being isolated in their homes.
So before we move on, there was a question that came up, and I think it's timely to ask that question now. It came up in our chat from our audience. Mike brought up that one of the biggest things has been the increased level of awareness, and the person asking the question want to know if any of you have seen that result in action being taken. Anyone want a quick jump in on that?
And no question, the community response has been unbelievable. I mean, there's no way we could have done what we've done the past year without that.
Okay, all right, very good. Anybody else would like to talk about increased action they've seen because of the awareness that's been created over the past year?
I think people have been very, very generous. To put a finer point on what Mike said, they've stepped up, but donations have really reflected people's new awareness and willingness to be generous to their neighbors.
Okay.
Excellent. So let's move on to the second question, and we want to hear from all of the panelists about this as well. In prior panels and a lot of the reporting we've done, we've heard about how organizations had to shift or pivot or just completely rethink all their processes. So we've heard a lot about the resilience among organizations in the effort to reduce food insecurity. Can each one of you share a story of resilience in your own organization from the past year? And let's just go in the same order. So Deann.
I asked my United Ways about this because, I am not in the front lines in my position, but many of them are. And you heard a little bit of the theme in the last answers, in that people couldn't receive food in the same way. So very quickly, communities had to figure out how to get the food to where the people were and make that COVID safe. That wasn't a shift that they were prepared to make or had thought about making before. And it was just really remarkable how they worked together and collaborated to deliver food, to have safe pickup, to have drive-through pickup. All of those kinds of shifts happened on a dime, and it's just amazing the work people did.
Excellent. Dr. Johnson, you're working at a government agency. It's a little different. What is a good story of resilience that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would definitely say just very proud of how our team members responded when the pandemic first hit the state. We obviously are a highly regulated program, so this was new territory in terms of how we had to pivot in order to ensure that service delivery could still occur. So our staff, again, began immediately obtaining those federal waivers so we could support virtual program certification processes, but also to provide flexibility in food options for clients so that they could still claim their benefits. If you'll remember, there were times when store options really became limited throughout the state of what was available for people. So having that flexibility was really critical. We also engaged in drafting guidance for our local agencies. We have 20 local agencies across the state. So the team members being able to provide that guidance as to what kind of safety protocols need to be in place in order to continue to protect community members. And then also just meeting with our local agencies on a regular cadence. So this allowed us to provide that troubleshooting, that lessons learned, but also a sense of camaraderie because it created community and that we knew everyone was experiencing going through this trauma together, but we could be able to troubleshoot that and save space for how best to continue the program together.
That's fantastic. Mike, at Riverbend Food Bank, what's a good story of resilience that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, so I'm a numbers guy. I'll give you 3 statistics. During a normal non-COVID year, we have 36 employees and almost 4,000 volunteers, and we had to make it through 2020 without almost all of those volunteers. And yet we distributed a record 23.1 million meals. That's, for those of you who don't know Riverbend, that's up from 7.3 million just back in 2014. That's pretty amazing, but even more amazing than that to me is that of the 300 partner agencies we have, the food pantries, shelters, and meal sites and the like, at the height, I mean, I was worried, at the beginning of the pandemic, this was a year ago, right? I was worried they're all going to shut down and we're going to have to figure out how to do home delivery. And at the height of the pandemic, only 17 of those 300 food pantries shut down. And so there's we talk about the work of the food bank and these other great organizations represented today, but there's no way this happens without the work of all of those great partners too. And I so much appreciate them.
Clint, Cedar Rapids not only had a pandemic, but you were among the most hard hit in the derecho. And I know that created new challenges. What's a story of resilience in your organization that we need to know about?
Yeah, so Matthew 25 as an organization really operates at a neighborhood level, working on food and hunger issues. And so, like you said, when the derecho happened, we run a cafe that's a pay-as-you-can cafe that lost its roof. We run an urban farm that has community gardens. We had trees kind of fall all over people's gardens. We have a greenhouse there. The roof was blown off the greenhouse. So there were a lot of challenges, but the resilience of the community was incredible. Volunteers showed up, they cut up trees, they hauled them away. Within a week, we had pivoted and moved to a new location, and the food pantry was needed more than ever and has grown like crazy. And so we've just been amazed at the resilience of the entire community to kind of pull us and others through.
Thank you. Rebecca, what about you at DMARC?
Well, I want to add to that. Volunteers have been so wonderful and they've stepped up. And I want to tell you a brief story about our delivery program. where our volunteers, we need those volunteers to do the deliveries to these homebound people. And we had a gentleman who lived on the second floor and they couldn't access the building. So he literally dropped a rope out and the volunteer helped it hoist that food up to him in a safe manner. And it became, instead of a struggle for being food insecure, it became a joy and laughter situation that both the volunteer and the gentleman really enjoyed that interaction that occurred on kind of a regular basis for a while he needed assistance. So volunteers have just been incredible, stepping up whenever we need them to.
Well, these are all very inspiring stories. So thank you for sharing. Michael, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. And we're going to shift here a little bit and start asking questions of specific panelists. But I want to remind the other panelists that when we ask questions that maybe we aren't directing, toward you, if you have a thought that you would like to share, you're absolutely welcome to jump in and add those additional thoughts to our conversation today. The next question I would like to ask specifically to Mike and Deann, and we'll start with Mike. With the innovation and adaptation that's occurred over the past year, what have you seen that's worked and what hasn't worked?
Sure. So my favorite thing we have done throughout the whole pandemic is open food pantries at shopping malls. We've seen these pictures on television, these massive distributions that serve like tens of thousands of people and they block traffic for miles and you're making people wait for hours. Instead, we went to shopping malls, leased some space out in the parking lot, and then we're open multiple times a week at this location. So we're able to serve hundreds of people multiple times a week rather than kind of a one-time all. And honestly, I don't know how we'd have gotten through the pandemic without that. The other thing is we had to shift to these drive-through distributions, right? So instead of having people come in and to maintain distancing, keep everybody safe, literally just drive a car up, pop your trunk, we put the food in the trunk and off you go. Now that's the good. The other side of your question, Michael, is that eliminates choice, right? Choice is a really an important aspect of it for people in need. Letting them pick the food they want, they don't get something they don't want, it preserves dignity. That's important. And then I guess the one thing I'd kind of caution us on during this kind of massive effort to try to distribute as much food as possible, there was all this food available, for example, through the USDA's Farmers to Families food box. Some really well-intentioned people have kind of gotten a bunch of folks involved who don't necessarily have the capability to keep the food safe. And I've heard horror stories of semi trucks of those boxes delivered to a street corner and then left sitting outside because the organization involved didn't have capacity to store. And so I just make sure that we don't have a lower standard of food safety just because this is charity. Hungry people deserve the same standard of food safety as all of us would expect at our grocery.
And Deann, what have you seen over the past year with all the innovation and adaptation that's occurred? What's worked and what hasn't worked?
So at United Way, we're really interested in convening communities to give, advocate, and volunteer. And volunteer in a COVID world was really difficult. It's hard to show up in a COVID safe way. So you saw it in the videos we saw at the beginning of today's program, where people were really able to still give their time to food banks because food banks moved outdoors, they created distance, they made it really easy and feel safe for people to volunteer. So hopefully some of those newer volunteers that hadn't given time to a food bank or food pantry before will continue to do so as we go forward, because they were able to feel useful, do valuable volunteer work, and do it in a safe way. I don't have a specific thing to say doesn't work, other than food was the immediate need, food was the most obvious need, food was where all the attention went. And as I said earlier, people have been incredibly generous. But we just can't forget that there are a number of human services issues. It isn't just food. So when we come out the other side of this, the increased awareness is great, but we also need to remember there are lots of human services needs.
Thank you very much.
Do we have
This is
any?
Anna.
Yeah, do any of the other, this is a really fascinating question Michael just asked. Do any of the other panelists want to jump in on it? We are doing fine on time, so would love to hear your thoughts.
This is Nalo. I'd be happy to answer that as well. I think that the discussion around telehealth for our physical and our mental health services through this period has really been grasped as an advantageous innovation through the last year. That application of the virtual technology for our service provision as well, I think is an innovation that has been great for us to explore from an accessibility standpoint, to have this as an additional tool for people to be able to utilize. Also works well, we have found has worked well with a segment of our client population. So again, just being able to use those virtual technologies has been helpful.
Terrific. Any other panelists on this question?
The only other thing I'd say that I think was kind of highlighted is that food, throughout its tradition has been a gathering tool, right? A place of community building. And I think that's the biggest loss. Food pantries and everything else become places where people check in, they get to know people, they know they're cared about, they have other needs met. And so we know that there are people that are being missed out during this year and people who are declining because they haven't had that human contact this year. So we look forward to getting back to that.
I think we
just wanted to add so that the pantries have all had to adapt, and sometimes multiple times, to figure out how to provide food with dignity and respect and meet clients' dietary needs and cultural needs. So trying to provide choice to individuals has been really important. And so they've adapted how they manage that. And each pantry pretty much has adapted differently.
Excellent. So the next question that we have, and I'll start out asking both Clint and Rebecca, but has the demand that you saw early on in the pandemic leveled off at all? Do you see signs that it's improving, or is it actually getting worse? Let's start with Clint.
Yeah, so we're relatively new to the food pantry thing, but what we've seen is a continued increase. So just kind of looking at numbers, we went as a new pantry from serving 300 or 400 people to now serving 1,200 per month, from distributing a couple thousand pounds of food to this last month, we went up to 15,000 pounds of food. And so we just feel like every month we're growing by 10 or 20% more people coming in. And hopefully, as we move into the fall, things will start to get better, but I don't think we've come close to turning the corner yet.
And Clint, are those new people who have not used food pantries before?
A lot of them are people that have not used food pantries before, yes.
Interesting. Rebecca, what are your observations? Is it leveling off? Is it improving, or is it getting worse, as Clint is experiencing?
Well, like Clint, we have seen about 14,000 brand new people to our network, which is a real concern for us in the sense that those people are new. They had jobs, they were able to take care of their needs previously, and now they need food assistance. But we've also seen kind of an ebb and flow related to the SNAP benefits, the food assistance program. When it has increased, we see fewer people needing assistance when stimulus checks go out. So if people have money to buy their own food, they usually choose to do that. But we're concerned about when all of those stimulus, the increased SNAP benefits, all that goes away, that additional 14,000 people that we're seeing on top of our regular clientele will continue to need assistance.
Got it. So what about others on this same question? Mike, you probably have some real good firsthand knowledge of whether things are getting better, worse, or leveling off.
Sure, I've got some kind of statewide stats that I think kind of help people grasp it. That pre-COVID, the number of people that we would consider food insecure, right? So that's not, I mean, I didn't get breakfast this morning, so I'm a little hungry, but you know, I'm not missing meals. So this is people whose limited access to food inhibits their ability to function, their ability to learn, their ability to work, their ability to be active. Pre-COVID, that was 305,100 people in the state of Iowa, or 9.7%. In the immediate aftermath of COVID, so this data was released maybe around May, that jumped by over 50%, 459,850 people, 14.6%. Then we redid that study toward the end of the year, came out October-ish, and the number had eased to 405,100, but that's still 100,000 more people than pre-COVID. So, you know, I think that's kind of an accurate story. And then I'd love to highlight what both Clint and Rebecca had shared. Close to a third of those people are new, have never needed help from a food bank or food pantry ever before in their lives. Many of them don't know what to do, and very much feel the stigma of, well, I shouldn't ask for help, that's not for me. And so one of the greatest things that anybody watching today can do to help is just reduce that stigma. That's why food banks and food pantries and the other organizations who are here exist, to help you. So don't think, oh, is that for me, or I don't need public assistance or whatever. Just think, if food would help you, please come. That's why we're here.
I think you bring up an incredibly important point around stigma, just trying to create awareness, not only that this is an issue, but that there are resources there for people to access. So does anybody else want to jump in on this question? Any of the other panelists?
I can also share from our WIC participant data that historically, when we see our children ages 1 through 5 participation rise, that's really an indicator of financial instability in the state. So at the beginning of 2020, we were about 53% of our WIC participants were in the child population. In April of 2020, that jumped to 54%, and by September was at 56% and has remained around that 56% level. So that indicates to us that there is still a need within the community, because we haven't seen that percentage decrease.
Decrease at all. Wow, that's amazing.
And I can just add to the chorus. Right before this, I quickly pulled from our 211 counts the last 90 days of calls and how many of those were related to food insecurity. It was double the prior year period. So it still is significantly higher than it was before the pandemic in terms of people who are reaching out looking for either to find a food pantry or to find assistance with purchasing food.
That's really, really amazing. So I think, Michael, the next question is yours.
And it ties in really as a good follow-up to what all of you have just been talking about. I think all of you mentioned that you've seen increased need, and that even maybe things have leveled off a little bit, but it's still higher than it was before pre-pandemic levels. What are projections for how long this higher level of demand will continue? And Deann, I'd like to keep you on the screen and target that question to you. With these higher levels, how long do you think that's going to last?
Well, I think it's hard to say a timeline. I think it's more important to understand the fundamental context of financial insecurity, which we know going into COVID, it was about 40% of Iowa households lived below a survival budget as a result of our Alice report. We conducted a United Way COVID financial impact study in the fall and found that people were really, really destabilized, and the lowest income people were the most destabilized. They were most likely to have worked in food service, in hospitality, in retail, in those kinds of industries that got shut down, and they have no cushion. So think about in normal times, a blown tire can throw them off for months. So think about what this kind of disruption over a period of many months, how long that will throw them off. It's just, they can't just bounce back and dip into savings. So I think we're going to see this continue on for a long time.
Is there an income level that you cite as being a level where people can, you know, afford to pay their bills, not any extras, but just afford to pay those basic bills? What is that income level?
So interesting question. And in our ALICE report, our most recent ALICE report, which is now a couple years old, our ALICE threshold, which is what we call, you know, self-sufficiency, is $50,000 roughly for a family of 4. And just to put that in context, because most people think federal poverty level is telling them something, what it really takes to survive is double the federal poverty level. Federal poverty level for a family of 4 is about $25,000. In Iowa, it takes about $50,000 for them to survive.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, because I think that's always a number that probably catches a lot of people by surprise, which goes back to the people we probably know, that our neighbors and maybe, you know, our friends and family may all fall, you know, really close or under that threshold, and we may just not know it. Mike, you've got something you'd like to add?
Yeah, so you hit a pet peeve of mine. Whatever that number is, it's not the federal poverty level. That seems to be what people use. The federal poverty level was based on a family budget in 1967. Back then, food was about a third of a family budget. So they figured out what would it take to feed a family of 4. They multiply by 3, and they call that family of 4, or they call that the poverty level. In 2020, food is now 1/9 of a family's budget, and they're still doing the exact same thing. They're adding up how much does it take to feed a family of 4. They're multiplying by 3, and they're calling that the federal poverty level. It is so obsolete. They could triple it, and it would, and that would be about right. And you know what people don't often realize is half the people coming to food pantries aren't eligible. They're above the federal poverty level. They're the working poor. They're trying. They're not deadbeats sitting on the couch. They're trying to make things work and need help. But that federal poverty level, that's just a ridiculous number.
Well, I appreciate your additional thoughts. Susanna, I'll pass it on to you.
I had to unmute myself because my dog was barking in the background. Sorry about that. So when we did focus groups last year, exploring how we thought we could be helping as a publishing company, one of the things that we heard over and over was, this is a problem. The problem is getting worse. There's some attention on it, but our fear, this is from people who are in the sort of in the industry, is that if it becomes the issue du jour, you know, how do you keep interest and awareness and action? So our question is there a concern that the focus that you've seen now on food insecurity will fade away once things return to pre-pandemic levels, but the need is still as great as it is? And why don't we start with Dr. Johnson on this one?
I think that because we have collectively, as a state and as a nation, gone through this trauma together, this has presented us an opportunity to think about how are we addressing the challenge of food insecurity, and then what kind of partnerships are we able to create. And I'm thinking specifically about not only the Iowa Stops Hunger Initiative, but also the Governor's Feeding Iowans Task Force Initiative. So these opportunities now have really provided us with a playbook that we can point to as potential solutions when we need to call on these type of solutions. I think though, with the current and consistent experience of food insecurity, it's going to be hard for this topic to just fade away once we are post-pandemic. But I do think, and this is similar to what Deann spoke to earlier, I feel that the conversation is going to pivot and not just address people's immediate needs around hunger, but really think about encompassing a broader conversation as to the factors that create food insecurity in our community and how we can collectively engage and focus on eradicating hunger, not just responding to an immediate need. We haven't had the time and space yet within the pandemic to have that broader discussion, but I believe that will be where we will need to pivot as a community.
One great point to bring up is our second Iowa Stops Hunger panel back in November really focused on policy. So for folks who are interested in policy, we talked about drivers of hunger. You can go to our website, Iowa Stops Hunger, and see some replays of that particular panel. Well, let me ask that same question then to some of the other panelists. Is there a concern that the focus on food insecurity now will fade once things return? Let's go to Rebecca, and then we'll do a round robin.
Well, I'm hoping it doesn't, and I hope that the pandemic has brought up the issue of not only feeding people calories, but healthy food and how important that is, that the discussions will continue on that. I do have concerns that people will in general think, oh, everybody is immunized, the pandemic is over, and everybody now is back to their normal, and that they have jobs and they're back to their lifestyle they were pre-pandemic. And during the recession of 2009, we saw that it was basically our level of need went up and it never went down again. So I'm hoping that that isn't the situation, but it would not surprise me. I think it's going to take probably 1 to 3 years for our economy really to recover from this.
Anybody else want to share? I'd love to hear from everyone on this. Mike, you want to pop in on this one?
Sure, glad to jump in. I mean, it's a cliche, but this is absolutely a marathon, not a sprint. Or actually, it was a sprint followed by a marathon, if that makes sense. You know, Rebecca puts it pretty well in terms of economic recovery is typically a 3-year process. Typically, the stock market comes first, and then jobs, you know, maybe a year later, jobs happen. And then only a year later do you see any movement in terms of poverty. But typically, the news media moves off the topic once with the stock market. And so continuing to shine a light is important. But, you know, to put it in perspective, if you go back to the Great Recession of 2009, we have been working, had COVID not happened, we would have probably called a press conference at the beginning of 2020 to announce that for the first time since the Great Recession, food insecurity had finally reached below 2008 levels. It had a big jump in 2009, and then we've been whittling away, and finally got 10 years later below 2008. And then COVID happened and went higher than any of it. So I'm not trying to be gloom and doom when I suggest this, but I don't, even if we were all immune tomorrow, we could be in for another 10 years of this. What gives me hope is what I spoke about earlier, which is, but there is a greater awareness than ever before. And our job is to sustain, is to sustain that awareness following COVID and not let things get back to normal.
Anyone else want to answer this one?
Well, I would push back on Mike a little bit, just slightly. Normal wasn't that good. I mean, normal was good compared to 2008, but we had Iowans struggling before the pandemic happened, and this just made it worse. So I echo Dr. Johnson's statements, and that's my hope too, that this leads to a broader discussion about policy and a broader discussion about why were all those cars lined up. We give people a bag of food and that takes care of an immediate need, but why did they need to be in the line? that's what we haven't been talking about, and hopefully seeing it for 12 months will allow us to elevate that discussion.
Oh, Deann, I don't think that's a pushback at all. I mean, I don't want things to go back to normal, right? I mean, the level that we're responding to now is about what it would have taken to put an end to hunger pre-pandemic. So we absolutely want to keep things where they are in terms of the response and continue moving for that ultimate vision. I saw that question in the Q&A. The ultimate vision is put an end to hunger, right? I mean, there's enough food to feed everybody, so let's do that. So no, I agree with your point completely.
I think the other thing I would add is that, you know, we're all starting to feel a little better and more hopeful, right? And so I think there's going to be this huge psychological push to like, oh, I want to feel like we've returned to this great place and things are good and I'm happy. And we won't necessarily want to deal with all of this systemic inequities that remain. And we, even in the nonprofit world and the policy world, are really good at like talking about things in nice voices and talking about problems in a way that slowly moves towards incremental change. But I think we're going to need to remain engaged at the level of the streets activity that we've seen in the last year, where people have just said, enough with systemic inequity, things need to change. And the only way that this will continue to be spotlighted is if just the average ordinary citizen says, we want this to change.
Fantastic answers. So Michael, I think it's over to you.
Yeah, what I'd like to do is kind of deviate again. We call today's event Suddenly Hungry, which ties into this question, and it's not the one that just popped on your screen. But someone asked a question in the chat about the demographics of who those new people are that are using the food pantry network. And I'm just wondering, Rebecca, do you have any insight as far as who those people are, what they, you know, what they look like, who they are?
I would say they're neighbors. They're the families struggling because their kids are not receiving school lunches. Their hours have been cut. Most of them were basically managing their lives just perfectly fine. And all of a sudden they have to find a new way of making ends meet and feeding their families.
And Mike, do you want to tell us who some of those new people might be?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I mean, yes, it's people furloughed from their jobs. It's people whose kids used to eat at school who are now home. But this really ties into the equity discussion that's taking place nationwide. I mean, we had a little sidebar going on in the chat. I put a link to the USDA's most recent report on food insecurity. It includes demographic data, so you'll learn like how much harder it is for a single mother to have enough food than a two-parent home. But straight from today's headlines, Black Americans are 2.5 times less likely to have enough food than white Americans. And there is nothing about the color of someone's skin that should determine whether or not they have enough food. And so somehow, as a part of addressing this whole food insecurity and hunger issue, whatever it is that's broken in our society that causes that to be true is central to our fixing the hunger issue.
And Deann, do you want to add any insight you may have?
I would just reflect back to the 211 experience, and a term was coined after we started getting calls called the newly needy. And it was folks who have been described by other panelists who had never had to navigate food assistance, never had to navigate any kind of public assistance, utilities, rent, whatever it may be. And they were just lost and also embarrassed and feeling the stigma. So in our COVID financial impact study, people who reported unemployment as their primary source of family income. So unemployment, primary source of income before the pandemic was 1%. At the time of our study, it was 10% of those households had their primary source of income as unemployment. So that's a huge group of people who had been working, earning, making their own way, and suddenly found themselves navigating a system they never thought they would have to.
Would any of the other panelists like to speak to this topic? Clint or Dr. Johnson?
I think just echoing what's already been shared about disproportionate impact, and it really does speak to the interconnected nature of other social determinants and poverty in our community. So as many of the panelists, if not all of us, have shared today, we can't just be discussing hunger and expect to see that all of our community needs are going to be met. This is a multi-layered, multi-sectorial discussion.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your thoughts on that. Mike, we're going to come back to you here quickly. What are some of the challenges that you see facing food banks in the coming months to sustain and keep up with the current demand?
Sure. I mean, what we've been facing throughout is the need to balance a response to the immediate crisis against the need to sustain that over time, right? So there was kind of this influx of resources, and we really didn't know, is that new money, was that pulled forward money, we couldn't really spend it all because we might have to, because we got to make this last, right? We couldn't distribute a whole bunch of food last May and then run out of food in the summer. And so we've had to do both, right? The need jumped and we have to respond, but then we've got to kind of stretch that out. And that's, that has been a challenge, right? I mean, how in the world do you do a budget during COVID? That someday Harvard will write a business case about that, because budgeting in COVID was impossible, but we still had to have one. But I think what I'd toss out maybe for the audience that we have today, because you got people involved in all different areas. You've got people involved in food banks, United Way, and big organizations, and you have folks who are helping right there in their town or their community there and such. And what I'd toss out is, what is your vision for your organization? Are you on board with us to achieving this vision of putting an end to hunger? Our guests more unedited, or do you just want to be doing a little bit to feel good about that? I mean, if you are a food pantry that's still only letting someone come once a month and only giving them 3 days of food, please stop that. I eat more than 3 days a month. You do too. So please give them more than that. If you're still requiring ID, which frankly, if you take TFAP, is illegal, stop it. We have to put the person experiencing hunger at the center of our work and think about what the experience is like for them and reduce every barrier there possibly could be, so we can treat them as equals and finally put an end to this just serious issue.
Rebecca, I'm curious what your thoughts are on what challenges you see moving forward to sustain the current level in your role as managing DMARC's food pantry system.
I agree with a lot of the things Mike has said, but also one of the big challenges for us is we purchase a large quantity of our food that we distribute in our network, and we provide basically staple items and guarantee those to our pantry network. The supply chain has been very challenging over the last year. There are products that are no longer available, and we've seen 10 to 15% increases in the cost of that food that we purchase. Now, when you go to the grocery store, you might say, oh, that bag of rice is 10 cents more than it was the last time I bought it. And it doesn't seem like a big deal to you, but that 10 cents to us is $500 for a pallet of rice. And that's just one item we're providing. So I think the cost of food, and that is expected to continue on. A normal year, it's about 1.4% increase in food cost. This last year, it's been over 4% overall, and they expect that to continue. So that's a challenge for us. And I agree with Mike about budgeting. It's just really hard when you're seeing these increases that you did not anticipate to budget.
Clint, I'd like to bring you in on this conversation with operating a food pantry within your organization. Tell us what challenges you see, and particularly, I'm going to change the question up just a little bit. I know that over the past year, the purchase of retail, the purchase of food from wholesalers and retailers has dropped, meaning that you've had to rely more on donations. Clint, I'm kind of wondering what you see as being some of the big obstacles that you need to overcome over the next year to maintain this level of demand.
Yeah, so I mean, we got into this when there really was a whole lot of free food being given away by the larger food bank organizations, right? And so as we look long term at what's going to need to shift, we're actually shifting our model long term to being a nonprofit grocery store that will still have some free food available to people, so that we can expand hours, so that we can focus more on healthy food, that kind of thing. I think one of the overwhelming challenges facing our state in food insecurity is struck me with these latest COVID vaccinations being available, you know, and they said that 50% of the state now has some sort of underlying medical condition that will allow them to access the vaccine faster. And a huge part of that comes down to the food that we're pushing at people, or that people are eating, that's low cost. Somehow we have to continue working on the challenge of how to make healthy food the easy choice and the choice people want.
Well, Clint, I'm going to keep you on the screen for our next question. Moving forward, as we look over the next several months, over the next year, what are some of the solutions or actions that people can take to help food banks and pantries maintain those current levels of services over the long haul?
Yeah, I think that this is an issue that is needs people at the policy level, the governmental level. It needs a large response, right? But it also needs, like I said, people that are locally engaged. And so, you know, we're not going to have as much healthy food being given. So if you have land and you can plant a few square feet of garden and you can take that produce to your local food bank, that would be awesome. If you are connected to a civic organization or a church and they have space where they can plant a larger garden and help people to have access to that food, that would be great. And I think more than anything, as we're like able to open back up a little bit, everybody should make it a personal goal to know somebody that's hungry, to have a real relationship with a kid or an adult that's hungry, because once you have that face that you connect with, that story you connect with, it changes your motivation and pushes you further than you would otherwise go.
And Rebecca, what are some of the solutions you see that people can take, or actions people can take to really help food pantries and food banks maintain this level of service?
I agree with everything Clint said. You know, plant a garden, donate healthy food when you can. Also, if you can do a reoccurring gift to your pantry or your food bank organization, that is money then they can depend on month in, month out. And I think that's really important. Also volunteer when you can. Experience what it's like, get to know people. I agree with Clint on that, because it's not who you think is hungry and needs assistance. Vote to end food insecurity and support policies that end food insecurity. So I think all of those are measures you can do. And if you do a food drive, ask your pantry or ask your food bank, what are the food items that you really need, what you are looking for? So it is a focused food drive. I think those types of things are really important.
And Mike, what are some of the things that you see that people can do as far as actions they can take to help?
Sure. Well, there's going to be a lot of agreeing with Clint going on this question. And my favorite thing he said was know somebody who's hungry. We have got to incorporate the voice of the person experiencing hunger into our decision making. I mean, I make decisions every day that affect hungry people. I think I know what I'm talking about. Why should I just assume? Let's get their voice involved and have them participate. A couple other things I think, though, it absolutely is a public-private solution. So their public policy has to be part of putting an end to hunger and any disproportionate impact and all that kind of thing. It takes three things to make this work: food, time, and money. So anywhere you're able to affect any of those things, come help with any of them. But I will continue. Well, and the specific to policy issues, there's a bill in front of the State House right now to help food banks and food pantries not pay sales tax. So all of you are making donations to us, and then a portion, every time we buy something, some of that money goes back to the state of Iowa. I'm sure you don't want that. I'm sure you want all your money helping hungry people. So please call your state senator and representative and tell them to support that bill. Finally, we've been after this for like 5 years, and this should be the end of it. But I'll give you one last thing. There's enough food to feed everyone. We're just throwing it away. This country throws away 1/3 of the food we produce. So, here in the breadbasket that is Iowa, let's do a variety of things. Hy-Vee is a sponsor today. Let's get Hy-Vee to put together a corporate-wide comprehensive food donation program where Hy-Vees never throw food away. They donate it all to food banks and food pantries. But not just Hy-Vee, let's all do that, right? Literally the only thing it would take well, yes, we need the public-private partnership, but let's get the entire state to commit to never throwing away food that could still be eaten by someone in need.
It's been brought up that we all should get to know, that we all should meet someone who is experiencing food insecurity or who's hungry. Would that be a big step forward in overcoming that question of stigma? Mike, do you want to kind of start with that?
Sure. I think even someone else suggested this. Whatever your stereotype is of someone who's hungry, please just come out and meet one. Come out, volunteer at food bank or food pantry, at any food distribution, and just meet people, pass out food, and you'll find they're just regular people like you and me. It'll change your life forever.
And Deann, I'd like to bring you in on that question about overcoming stigma. What really needs to happen to really help people not feel self-conscious, not feel ashamed, not feel, like something's wrong if they have to visit, a food pantry or seek assistance?
Well, I think that's just who we are, right? Especially as Iowans, they're always going to feel a little bit of shame when they're in that position. So it's to be there, be the friendly face, be the volunteer. As more of us get vaccinated, it should be easier for us to volunteer and get out there and make it okay and greet them as with the dignity and respect they deserve. But also, and we've kind of touched on this, but nobody's really said it, giving out food does not solve hunger. It solves hunger for a day. We have to get involved at the policy level to say, why are so many people hungry? And it's because they don't have opportunities. So if they had opportunities to support themselves and go to the grocery store and buy and choose what they want, that would be their first choice. So how do we move toward that world?
So we have some extra time, so I'm going to ask at least one or two other quick questions here. I'd like to talk about the challenges of rural versus urban or metropolitan when it comes to the fight against food, the fight against food insecurity. And Deann, did you see challenges that are specific to one of those populations or challenges that are magnified in the rural area versus urban or vice versa?
In our work, we see that the challenges exist in both areas. They're just different. Right. So in rural areas, healthy food's further away. It's easy to stop at the Casey's or the Dollar General because that's what's available. That's what's closest. And that might always not be the healthiest choices, but they're the cheapest choices. In urban, you can get a better job, you can earn more money, but the cost of living is much higher. So it's just it's a trade-off between those different kinds of challenges, but the challenges exist.
Okay. Anybody else would like to answer that question?
to add real quickly. So the USDA Farmers to Families boxes have been a wonderful thing. They provide produce and dairy and protein items to families. But it's been a bigger challenge, I think, for the rural community than it has for the urban community, because some of the distribution of that has required that you be able to take a full semi-load of those boxes. And so then that is very difficult for rural areas to be able to distribute those. And I think Mike talked about this earlier, and have the refrigeration and those kind of challenges. So I think we need to look at the needs of the different communities and try to address those when it comes to our distribution of food out to these different areas.
I appreciate your guys' comments on that today. Susanna, I'll pass it back to you.
Well, we are getting close to the end. We want to give our panelists a little bit of time to give a closing thought and a final takeaway. But I want to share a couple of things. First, a little bit of what I heard, and actions are ways you can help. So if you're attendees, we've been saying through our videos, give funds, give food, give your time. But I think the things I've noted is, don't just give your time, meet someone, work to reduce stigma, and then change policy through voting or political action, not just around hunger, but to combat all things that are drivers of poverty. So let's talk a little bit about what is coming up. One unique element of our Iowa Stops Hunger initiative is a corporate challenge. And a lot of people have asked, what is this challenge? Are you trying to raise money? Are you trying to do this, that, or the other? Our whole goal with Iowa Stops Hunger is to raise awareness and to inspire action. So our corporate challenge involved asking the companies who signed on to support this initiative to take an action to address food insecurity, and or if they already had taken an action, then to report in on that action. So on June 4th, we will have our action summary publishing date. So in the business record, there will be a special section with over 40 companies who signed on to the corporate challenge, sharing what they have done over the course of the last year and at least one action step that they took. So the goal again is to help these companies showcase what they've done with the larger purpose that hopefully that will inspire others to action and to give tangible examples of things that other companies can do to support food insecurity. When we did our listening sessions on hunger a year ago, I think we've heard Mike said it's a marathon, not a sprint, though it was a sprint and a marathon. But at any rate, we heard over and over that there was a need to help shine a light on a problem that would continue throughout the pandemic. And what we know now is it will continue beyond the pandemic into a time of recovery and even into the greater future. That's why at the very beginning we decided on a longer term approach, and we are very pleased to announce that we will continue our Iowa Stops Hunger initiative going forward again next year. Hy-Vee and Mom's Meals are already helping make this possible through sponsorships. Once again, we're very, very grateful to them for their support. If you work for a company or are a leader in a company and you want to show your support and highlight your actions, then we invite you to join us. For more information on how you can get involved with Iowa Stops Hunger or the corporate challenge for the coming year, you can go to iowastopshunger.com/corporate-challenge. And if you wanted to email our leader in this effort, it's Sarah Brown at bpcdm.com. So I also want to let you know about a couple of things that are coming up here at Business Publications Corporation that you might be interested in. The first is our 40 Under 40 event on April 7th. This is a 20-plus year initiative where we recognize exceptional leaders in the community, both for their professional and community accomplishments. And we have a tremendous list of very, very diverse young leaders that I think personally have inspired me that we're going to be okay in the future if we have some of these folks at the helm. We talked a lot about drivers of poverty and things that contribute to difficulties in our state. DSM Magazine is once again continuing our series called Lifting the Veil, which shines a light on mental health issues. This year, our series will be called Life Transformed. We'll be looking at the effect of mental health, the pandemic's effect on the mental health of families and children in particular. And the first in that series is a noon virtual event called Moms on the Edge. I think everyone's been reading the reports about how the pandemic has disproportionately affected women in a myriad of ways, including mental health. So that's April 15th. And for more information about this and other things, you can go to businessrecord.com events or to dsmmagazine.com/lifting the veil. So hopefully I've given our panelists a moment to think a little bit about a quick takeaway. And so I'll go ahead and start with Rebecca and ask if you've got a parting shot for our attendees.
I just want to thank everyone that's involved with Iowa Stops Hunger. And I just want to ask people to keep food insecurity in the forefront. Make sure that you continue to be aware of what's happening along those lines. Find a way to help, if that's volunteering or donating. Just be involved with what works for you.
Wonderful. Deann?
Well, I think it's great news that we just heard that you're continuing Iowa Stops Hunger. This has really elevated the conversation, and you've had great crowds coming and learning more, because as Rebecca said earlier, if this isn't the world you work in, you probably don't realize a lot of the things that we've said today and how things work and data and statistics. So I applaud those who attended, who are working to learn more. And we can use more advocates. We can use more knowledgeable folks out there fighting hunger. And thanks to the Business Record for continuing the effort.
Wonderful. Nalo, Dr. Johnson?
There's so many wonderful insights today. So I'm grateful to all the other panelists and sharing those insights. Again, just to reiterate, I feel on that individual level, the Iowa Stops Hunger mantra of give food, give funds, give your time continues to ring true. So for individuals to be able to meet that would be wonderful. From a community standpoint and that long-term standpoint, being able to truly address the root causes of hunger will take policy considerations. So you can choose to engage on both that individual level, but also on the community level. We can work towards eradicating hunger in the state.
Mike, final thoughts?
So our world desperately needs 100% issue. The vitriol of our politics, not just over the last 4 years, but over, it's becoming more and more so the past decade. We're becoming more and more separated as a society, like literally separated. I read a study recently where people are literally moving away from each other physically. It's not just, in our viewpoints. And I would submit that ending hunger is 100% issue, that everyone in our society could come together around that. So we can't play politics with hunger. The other thing I would offer is that it's a completely solvable problem. Again, there's enough food to feed everyone. We're just throwing it away. So, the awareness because of COVID, COVID's been horrific, right? But one good thing that's come from COVID is a greater awareness of hunger than we've ever experienced before. So let's come together as a society and work toward my dream of the future, which is there's some night in our future where literally every person in Iowa goes to bed not having been fed and not being hungry.
Beautifully said. Clint?
I would just add to what Mike said about us moving apart from each other, and would encourage people as you walk, if at some point today you get released from Zoom or your computer and you can walk outside, think about those food banks in your town and what the system of health and food in those areas looks like. Where our food bank is, there are 3 bars and 3 convenience stores that bring food to the area, and that's it. Somebody asked about food deserts. We're creating haves and have-not places for fresh food in society, and that's part of what we need to look at too. So thanks for letting me be part of this. It's been great.
Well, thank all of you for your thoughtful comments and for giving your time today. Clint, you talk about the food banks and food pantries in your tiny town and trying to find someone you know. I live in itty-bitty Huxley, Iowa, and every morning when I walk my dog, I walk past a very small food pantry where the video store used to be. And more than ever, I see cars in those parking lots in a town with 3,000 people. I know that these are my neighbors, and they are people who probably before did not need that service. So thank you to all of you panelists who are working so hard, so many of our audience members who are also in organizations that make a difference. This is incredibly important work. I also want to thank our sponsors, again, Hy-Vee and Mom's Meals, and all of our corporate challenge partners helping power this change. Thanks again to Hy-Vee and Mom's Meals for joining us again as we move forward next year on this initiative. A special shout out, of course, to Michael Crum, my co-moderator, and Chris Konetsky, who you said hi to, everyone at Business Publications. This is across all of our divisions: Business Record, DSM Magazine, IA Magazine, and our Custom Publishing division. So every single individual at our company has been working on this, and I think has been transformed by this initiative as well. So thank you for joining us. Remember, give funds, give food, give your time. Thank you for caring about your fellow citizens. As Mike said, it's a lofty goal to think that we can stop hunger, but why not try? Together, we can make a difference. Thanks for joining, and this concludes our program.